The Glasgow summit is such a fraud. US President Joe Biden turning up to Glasgow in this massive motorcade before lecturing the rest of us to cut our emissions and then falling asleep while speakers inside droned on and on about the end of the world. Now, Australia's media, they were predicting that Prime Minister Scott Morrison would be attacked at this farcical conference for his global warming policies. Turns out it's been attacked instead for something unrelated, for supposedly lying about Australia's submarines deal with France. French President Emmanuel Macron on the weekend called Morrison a liar without giving any proof, of course. A liar for allegedly fooling Macron before tearing up that subs deal with France and making a deal instead with the US and Britain for a better nuclear sub.
Do you think he lied to you?
I don't think. I know.
As for Joe Biden, he threw Morrison under a bus, the US president telling Macron that Morrison had been clumsy and claiming falsely that Biden didn't know France had been kept out of the loop. I said last night Morrison had been weak in hitting back. Today's been stronger. But I do think this response was stupid, pretending that Macron had attacked Australia when in fact Macron had been very personal. He said his real problem was just with Morrison.
I think the statements that were made questioning Australia's integrity and the slurs that have been placed on Australia, not me, I've got broad shoulders, I can deal with that, but those slurs, I'm not going to cop sledging at Australia.
Joining me from Glasgow is Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. The Prime Minister's office has in fact now leaked evidence that Macron and Biden were both not telling the truth about him. Take us through it.
Well, yes. I mean, I can't conclusively say they've leaked that, but where else would it come from? And the Prime Minister certainly didn't deny the text message from Macron 2 or 3 days before the AUKUS agreement was announced. Came out of his office that said, why are you trying to call me? Is it good news or bad news on subs? And Morrison responds, I really need to get on the phone to you. And of course, he didn't get him on the phone. So the PM arguing it's not right to say that I lied to him. I met him in Paris in June, and he was informed about the problems with the existing contract, that we didn't maybe want conventional subs. No doubt Macron then offered nuclear subs or tried to fix it, but Scott Morrison's gone with the US and UK technology. And in terms of the Joe Biden thing, well, yes, we've seen the leak in the Australian of a 15-page document given to the US administration outlining how it would all work out, when the French would be told, etc. So Joe Biden obviously said, look, I understood you knew sometime before. Maybe the plan was for Morrison to call Macron. It didn't Macron didn't take the call, so we've ended up where we are. But it's all been messy, to say the least. And Scott Morrison prides himself on looking good on the international stage. Andrew, he certainly felt that way after the G7 Plus meeting in June, where he got all countries to make statements standing up to China. That hasn't been the nature of this trip. Probably his worst overseas trip in terms of controversy following him around, and two leaders not being particularly complimentary of him.
Yeah, but I thought he really should have fronted up much harder and got personal with Macron in return. I mean, he looked actually rather shaken at first by Macron's attack, certainly yesterday. And maybe, I don't know, Andrew, maybe he just likes being loved a little bit too much. You remember how shaken he was when he was being given the bird during the Queensland, during the bushfires a couple of years ago. What did you make of his response this time?
I thought he was rattled, so they obviously came out hard the next day. They had all their ducks lined up. They were briefing out the Macron conversations. And then he said, look, I'll take you step by step through what happened. And that kind of made sense. But for him to say it was a slur on Australia is garbage, really, from Macron. It was a slur on Morrison. Yeah. Macron actually praised the Australian people, but said that Scott Morrison's reputation is damaged and that he lied to him. So that was an exercise in spin, put it that way, Andrew.
Yeah, I thought it made an otherwise good response look really, again, weak. Morrison's speech to this global warming conference, how did it go down? Was it really the lead balloon that many activists and politicians have predicted? Well,
I think in Australia we just think we're more important than we are in these things, Andrew, to be frank. there hasn't been that much discussion of Australia that I've seen. The big question, and really it is the big question for the world, is what India are doing. 8% of the world's emissions, China 27%, Russia 5%. We're something like 1.5%. So, and Morrison has committed to net zero. But he's on about technology, not taxes. If I had $1 every time he said technology, not taxes on this trip, I may as well have backed Very Elegant this afternoon. Essentially, I'm getting sick of the slogan. But his point is probably a well-made one. Why would China and India do something out of altruism? They've got a lot of poor people who need electricity. Until the other technologies than coal-fired power are cheaper, they're not going to really head that way. But the focus a lot's been on India saying net zero by 2070, and we'll both be pushing up daisies well and truly by then, Andrew. I mean, it seems pretty meaningless. And so Boris Johnson is not getting the result he wanted. Scott Morrison, 3-minute speech, just like the president or the leader of Montenegro, of the Congo, of all these other speakers. He was after Narendra Modi, admittedly, but he wasn't one of the big speeches yesterday, and it was pretty much the same mantra. I'll tell you one interesting thing, though. Boris Johnson got up with pessimism, 1 minute to midnight, need climate action. Joe Biden warning of impending doom. Scott Morrison saying he's optimistic and saying the technology will get us there. So a completely different tone from Australia at this conference.
Well, Andrew, as you say, all this doom preaching and all these world leaders talking, how we're going to be changing the world's climate. How can they do that when the organisers couldn't even organise this conference without chaos? Global warming alarmists like Mark Linus complaining about the cold instead after being stuck outside with hundreds and hundreds of other people. How are you finding this conference?
Oh, well, the first thing I think is COVID, even though I'm double vaccinated. The place is jam-packed. Anyone can get an accreditation, it seems. The queues out in the freezing cold are long, and we were in one of them. It does seem a bit disorganised, but, frankly, having lived here for a couple of years, about 15, 20 years ago, I've always found Britain a bit disorganised, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Andrew Clennell.